In the frozen territories where weakness is a death sentence, there lived an Omega named Elara, who had been surviving alone for 3 brutal years. Rejected by every pack, cast out for refusing a cruel alpha's mating bond, she wandered the wilderness with nothing but tattered furs and a forbidden treasure, the ancient texts, knowledge so powerful that pack elders had banned it for generations. Winter showed no mercy. Her lips cracked and bled in the bitter cold, her stomach cramped with hunger. Every night she wondered if she'd see dawn. But on one particularly savage evening, as a blizzard tore through the pines near Shadowpine Pack territory, Elara heard something that stopped her frozen heart, a child crying in the snow. The pup, she discovered, was no ordinary wolf. He was Kieran, 6-year-old son of Alpha King Thorne, the most feared ruler in the north. And he was failing to shift for the first time, a weakness that could cost him everything, even his life. What happened next would shake an entire kingdom. So settle in, because this story about forbidden knowledge, impossible courage, and a homeless Omega who changed everything is just beginning. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from so we can know how far our story reaches. All right, let's dive right in. The crying led Elara through snow that reached her knees, her bare feet numb beyond feeling. She should have turned away. She should have run. Getting close to pack territory meant risking execution, and approaching an alpha's pup was suicide. But the sound of that child's anguish pierced through 3 years of survival instinct. Reaching something deeper, something she thought the wilderness had frozen out of her. She found him beneath a towering pine, small and trembling, his dark hair dusted white with snow. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, dressed in fine furs that marked him as nobility, yet sitting alone in the bitter cold with tears streaming down his face. His little fists were clenched so tight they shook, and his eyes, those desperate, frustrated eyes, stared at his own hands as if they'd betrayed him. Elara recognized that look. She'd seen it before in young wolves who struggled with their first shift. But this was different. This child wore the scent of power, of pure alpha bloodline, and the weight of impossible expectations. "Please," the boy whispered to no one, to the moon, to the goddess herself. "Please let me shift. Please don't let me be broken." The word hit Elara like a physical blow. Broken. She knew that word intimately. She'd carried it for 3 years. She should have walked away. Instead, she stepped into the clearing. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elara slowly lowered herself to her knees in the snow, making herself smaller, less threatening. Her voice came out rough from disuse, but gentle. "You're not broken," she said. "You're fighting yourself, and that's why it won't come." The boy stared at her, taking in her matted silver hair, her gaunt face, her tattered furs. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what you're trying to do, and someone who knows why it's not working." Elara glanced around the empty forest, her heart hammering. This was madness. "You're the son of Alpha King Thorne, aren't you?" The boy's chin lifted with a flash of pride, then crumbled. "I'm Kieran, and I'm going to be thrown out if I can't shift before the first snow ceremony. That's in 3 weeks. His voice broke. "Everyone shifts by 6. Everyone. My father says only the strong survive, and I'm supposed to be strong, but I can't. I've tried and tried, and I can't. Because you're trying to force it." Elara's hand moved to the worn leather satchel at her side, where the ancient texts lay hidden. "Your wolf isn't something you command. It's something you become. There's a difference." Kieran wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "What do you mean?" Elara pulled out one of the smaller texts, its pages yellowed and delicate. She shouldn't be doing this. The pack elders had forbidden this knowledge for a reason. They feared it, feared what wolves might become if they truly understood the old ways. But looking at this terrified child, she couldn't walk away. In the old times, before the great packs formed, Our ancestors understood that shifting wasn't about dominance or force. It was about harmony, breathing, becoming. She opened the book to a page marked with a dried flower. Your wolf is already there, inside you. You're not calling it forth. You're simply stopping the fight against it. Kieran leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the strange symbols and illustrations in the ancient book. Can you teach me? Elara's throat tightened. Teaching him meant staying, meant risk, meant possibly dying when the Alpha King discovered a rogue Omega corrupting his heir with forbidden knowledge. But she looked at this small, desperate child and saw herself, rejected, terrified, convinced she was cursed. Yes, she whispered. But it has to be secret. If anyone finds out, I won't tell. I promise. Kieran's voice was fierce with hope. Please, I'll do anything. So beneath that pine tree, as snow fell silently around them, Elara began teaching the future king the ancient breathing techniques that the pack elders had tried to bury. She showed him how to quiet his racing mind, how to listen to the wolf within instead of commanding it, how to surrender control in order to gain it. And for the first time in 3 years, Elara felt something besides cold and hunger and fear. She felt purpose. The meetings became routine, though routine felt like a dangerous word for something so forbidden. Every evening, as twilight painted the snow purple and blue, Kieran would slip away from the pack compound, telling his nannies he needed to practice alone. And every evening, Elara would be waiting beneath their pine tree, the ancient texts carefully wrapped against the cold, her hollow stomach knotted with equal parts hunger and fear. The first week, Kieran could barely sit still for more than a few minutes. His young mind raced with anxiety, with the approaching deadline, with the weight of his father's expectations pressing down on his small shoulders. Elara watched him fidget and pace, recognizing the panic that made his wolf retreat further instead of emerging. Sit, she said softly, patting the snow beside her. We don't start with shifting. We start with breathing. But I only have 3 weeks. Which is why we start with breathing. Elara's voice was firm but kind. She opened the ancient text to a page covered in circular patterns, symbols that represented the cycle of breath, of life, of transformation. Your father has taught you that strength is dominance. The old ways teach something different. Strength is balance. Kieran sat, his small body rigid with frustration, but he listened. Elara taught him to breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, release for 4, wait for 4. She taught him to feel his heartbeat slow, to notice the tension melting from his clenched fists. She taught him that his wolf wasn't an enemy to conquer, but a part of himself that had been frightened into hiding by all his desperate forcing. Close your eyes, she instructed during their 3rd meeting. Now, picture your wolf. Not as something separate, but as yourself. What does it look like? Kieran's face scrunched in concentration. Black, he whispered, with gray on the chest, like my father's wolf, but smaller. Good. Now, instead of calling it, instead of commanding it to come, just be with it. Sit beside it in your mind. Let it know you're not a threat. The boy's breathing deepened, and for a moment, Elara saw something flicker across his features, a shimmer of connection, brief as lightning. It faded quickly, but it had been there. Progress. By the 2nd week, Kieran started bringing offerings. The first time, he arrived with a cloth-wrapped bundle and thrust it at Elara with shy urgency. Inside were 3 rolls from the packhouse kitchen, still warm, butter melting into the soft bread. Elara's hands trembled as she took them. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten warm food. Kieran, you can't. If someone notices, they won't. His young face was set with determination. You're helping me. I can help you. After that, he brought something every time. Bread, dried meat. Once, a wedge of cheese that made Elara's eyes water with gratitude. He never made a show of it, just set the food beside her as if it were nothing, as if he weren't quite possibly saving her life with each secret offering. The bond between them deepened with each lesson. Elara taught him visualization techniques from the ancient texts, how to see himself running through snow on 4 legs, how to feel phantom claws digging into frozen earth, how to imagine the wind in thick fur. She taught him the old songs that wolves once sang to call their animal selves forth, melodies that predated the rigid pack hierarchies and their obsession with dominance. Kieran absorbed everything with fierce concentration. Between their meetings, he practiced the breathing patterns, the mental exercises, the spiritual centering that Elara taught him. And slowly, incrementally, she watched the panic leave his eyes, replaced by something calmer, deeper. His wolf was still hiding, but it was no longer running. "Why did the elders forbid this?" Kieran asked one evening, his fingers tracing the symbols in the ancient text. "If it helps, why did they make it illegal?" Elara was quiet for a long moment, watching snow drift through the pine branches above them. "Because knowledge is power, little one. And those who hold power don't like to share it. If every wolf knew these techniques, if everyone understood the old ways, the pack hierarchy would change. Strength wouldn't just mean physical dominance, it would mean wisdom, balance, understanding." Kieran looked up at her with eyes far too serious for a 6-year-old. "My father says Omegas are weak, but you're not weak." The words lodged in Elara's chest like a stone. She'd spent 3 years believing she was worthless, believing her rejection had proven her inadequacy. But this child saw something different. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the strongest thing you can do is survive." As the 3rd week began, with only days remaining until the first snow ceremony, Elara knew they were running out of time. Kieran had made remarkable progress. His breathing was controlled, his mind centered, his connection to his wolf growing stronger each day. But he still hadn't shifted, and if he failed, everything would have been for nothing. Worse, Elara had started to care. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get attached, wouldn't let this child's fate matter too much. But every evening, when he arrived with that hopeful smile, every time he brought her food or asked eager questions about the ancient texts, every moment they spent together beneath their pine tree, it all mattered. It all hurt. Because when the Alpha King discovered what she'd done, and he would discover it eventually, she would pay with her life. The first snow ceremony was 2 days away when Kieran arrived at their meeting place with tears already streaming down his face. Not the frustrated tears of their first meeting, but something rawer, desperate. "I tried again today," he said, his voice breaking. "In front of the training master. He said if I can't shift by the ceremony, my father will have no choice. The pack laws are absolute." He looked up at Elara with eyes full of terror. "They'll cast me out. A 6-year-old cast out into winter. I'll die out here." Elara's heart clenched. She'd known the stakes were high, but hearing them spoken so plainly made her blood run cold. She pulled Kieran close, letting him cry against her shoulder, feeling his small body shake with sobs. For a moment, she was just a woman comforting a terrified child, pack laws and forbidden knowledge be damned. "Listen to me," she said when his crying quieted. "You've been practicing for weeks. You've learned the breathing, the visualization, the spiritual connection. You're ready, Kieran. Your wolf is right there, waiting. You're just still afraid." "I'm not afraid," he protested weakly. "You are, and that's okay." Elara pulled back to look at him directly. "You're afraid of failing. Afraid of disappointing your father, afraid of being cast out. But all that fear is building a wall between you and your wolf. Tonight, we're going to break that wall down." She opened the ancient text to the final teaching, the one she'd been saving. It showed a wolf standing at the edge of a cliff, the moon full above it, and beneath the illustration were words in the old language. Elara translated them carefully. "The shift comes not from strength, but from surrender, not from force, but from faith, not from fear, but from freedom," Kieran stared at the page, then at Elara. How do I surrender? You stop trying to control it. You stop worrying about the ceremony, about your father, about the pack. Right now, in this moment, there is only you and your wolf. Nothing else exists. Elara stood, brushing snow from her tattered furs. Stand up. We're going to do this differently tonight. She led him away from their usual spot, deeper into the forest where the moonlight broke through the canopy in silver shafts. The snow here was untouched, pristine, glittering like diamonds. Elara had Kieran stand in the center of a small clearing. Then she began the old song, the one that predated pack hierarchies and alpha dominance, the one that called to the ancient wolf spirit that lived in all their kind. Her voice was rough and untrained, but the melody was hauntingly beautiful, rising and falling like the wind through winter branches. She sang about the first wolves, about freedom and wilderness, and the joy of running under the moon. She sang about transformation not as a test or a trial, but as a birthright. Kieran closed his eyes, his breathing falling into the rhythm she'd taught him. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts wait. His small chest rose and fell steadily, and Elara watched as his face smoothed, as the tension drained from his shoulders, as he stopped fighting and simply let go. The shift began so subtly that Elara almost missed it. A shimmer in the air around Kieran, like heat waves in summer. Then his body began to change. Not violently, not with the painful cracking she'd seen in forced shifts, but fluidly, naturally, as if he were simply becoming what he'd always been meant to be. Black fur rippled across his skin. His small human form melted and reformed. His hands became paws. And then, standing in the moonlit clearing where a 6-year-old boy had been, there was a wolf pup, small but perfect, with midnight fur and a gray chest, his eyes bright with shock and wonder. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Kieran, the wolf, let out a sound between a bark and a howl, pure joy given voice. He bounded through the snow, clumsy and ecstatic, rolling and leaping and running in circles around Elara. When he finally shifted back, the transformation came easily, naturally, and he stood there naked in the snow, laughing and crying at the same time. "I did it!" he shouted, throwing his arms around Elara. "I did it! I did it! I did it!" Elara held him tight, her own eyes burning with tears she hadn't shed in 3 years. "You did it," she whispered. "You were magnificent." "You saved me," Kieran said, pulling back to look at her with fierce devotion. "You're my snow angel. That's what I'll call you, my snow angel who taught me how to fly." They practiced the shift 3 more times that night, until Kieran could transform smoothly in both directions. The fear was gone, replaced by confidence and joy. When it was time for him to return to the pack compound, Elara gripped his shoulders gently. "Remember, you can't tell them about me, about the texts, about any of this." "But you saved me!" "Kieran!" Her voice was firm. "Promise me. If they find out, I'll be killed, and they'll destroy the ancient texts, and no other struggling wolf will ever be able to learn what you learned. Promise me you'll keep the secret." His face fell, but he nodded solemnly. "I promise. I'll tell them. I'll tell them a kind wolf helped me. I won't say who. I won't say where. I'll keep you safe like you kept me safe." Elara watched him disappear into the darkness, his confident stride so different from the terrified child who'd first stumbled into their clearing. Pride and dread warred in her chest. She'd saved him, but in doing so, she'd set something in motion that she couldn't stop. The Alpha King would want to know who taught his son, and sooner or later, he would find out. The morning after Kieran's first successful shift, the entire Shadowpine Pack compound erupted with news that rippled through the territory like wildfire. The Alpha King's son, The boy who had been on the verge of exile, the pup who couldn't shift, had transformed flawlessly during an early morning practice session, not once but 5 times in succession, with a control that wolves twice his age struggled to achieve. Alpha King Thorne stood in the training grounds, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the snow, watching his son shift again with fluid grace. The black wolf pup that emerged was perfect, strong, balanced, moving with an instinctive understanding that should have taken months to develop. When Kieran shifted back, he wasn't even winded. Something was wrong, or rather, something was impossibly right. Thorne was not a man who believed in miracles. He'd clawed his way to power through strength and strategy, had united the northern packs through force and cunning, had survived assassination attempts and challenges that would have killed lesser alphas. He knew that skill like this didn't appear overnight. Someone had taught his son. Someone had given Kieran knowledge that transformed him from a failing pup into a prodigy in a matter of weeks. "Kieran," Thorne's voice cut through the excited chatter of the training grounds. Every wolf fell silent. "Come here." The boy approached his father with his head held high, confidence radiating from him where weeks ago there had been only fear and shame. Even his scent had changed. Less anxiety, more certainty. "Who taught you?" Thorne's question was direct, his dark eyes boring into his son's. Kieran didn't flinch. "A kind wolf, father. Someone who knew the old ways." What old ways? The temperature in the training ground seemed to drop. Several of the pack elders exchanged worried glances. "Breathing techniques, visualization, how to connect with my wolf instead of fighting it." Kieran's voice was steady, but Thorne caught the slight hesitation, the carefully chosen words of a child hiding something. Elder Mara stepped forward, her aged face creased with concern. "Alpha King, those techniques sound like the forbidden teachings. The ancient texts were banned for good reason." "I'm aware of our laws, Elder." Thorne's interruption was sharp. He looked back at his son. "Where did you meet this teacher?" "In the forest." "Where in the forest?" "I promised not to tell." Kieran's jaw set with stubborn determination. "They saved me, father. I was going to be exiled. They gave me a chance to survive. I won't betray them." Pride and frustration warred in Thorne's chest. His son was showing loyalty, honor, alpha qualities. But he was also hiding something that could be dangerous. The ancient texts had been forbidden because they challenged the pack hierarchy, because they gave power to those the system deemed weak. If someone was teaching those methods, especially to the heir, it could undermine everything the pack structure stood for, or it could revolutionize it. Over the next 2 days, Thorne watched his son carefully. Kieran's confidence continued to grow. He excelled in training, showed patience and wisdom beyond his years, and spoke with a certainty that commanded respect from wolves twice his age. Whatever he'd learned, wherever he'd learned it, the transformation was undeniable. But Thorne also noticed other things. The way Kieran slipped away each evening at twilight, the bread that went missing from the kitchens, the careful way his son washed before returning to the compound, as if hiding a scent. On the evening of the first snow ceremony, as the pack gathered to witness Kieran's official demonstration, Thorne made his decision. While the compound celebrated his son's flawless performance, 3 perfect shifts executed with grace and power, the Alpha King quietly assembled his elite guards. "My son has been meeting someone in the forest," he told them, his voice low and commanding. "Tonight, we follow him. I want to know who's been teaching the heir forbidden knowledge." His guards nodded, their faces grim. Teaching banned techniques was punishable by death. Approaching the Alpha's son without permission was punishable by death. If this mysterious teacher was a rogue, as Thorne suspected, the sentence was already decided. They waited until twilight painted the snow in shades of purple and gray. Just as Thorne predicted, Kieran slipped away from the celebration, moving through the compound with practiced stealth. The Alpha King and his 5 elite guards followed at a distance, their superior tracking skills making them nearly invisible in the darkening forest. Kieran's path was familiar. He'd clearly taken it many times. He moved with purpose through the pines, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, until he reached a large tree at the edge of pack territory. There, in a small clearing, a figure waited. Thorne's breath caught. She was nothing, a skeleton wrapped in rags and matted fur, her silver hair tangled and dirty, her feet bare against the snow. An Omega, unmistakably, her scent carrying the mark of a rogue. She was so thin that the wind should have blown her away, her cheeks hollow, her lips cracked and bleeding from cold. But in her hands, she held a book, an ancient book that Thorne recognized immediately from his own studies as a young Alpha, one of the forbidden texts that were supposed to have been destroyed generations ago. And when she looked up at Kieran, when she smiled at his son with genuine warmth and pride, Thorne saw something that shocked him more than the book, more than the forbidden knowledge, more than anything he'd expected. He saw intelligence, profound, sharp, undeniable intelligence burning in eyes that should have held only desperation and survival instinct. This homeless Omega, this dying rogue who looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in years, had single-handedly taught his son what the pack's best trainers couldn't. She'd given the heir knowledge that had been lost for generations. She'd saved Kieran's life. And according to pack law, Thorne would have to execute her for it. Elara sensed them before she saw them, the shift in the air, the weight of predatory attention, the sudden stillness that preceded violence. Her head snapped up from the ancient text, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. But Kieran was there, sitting cross-legged beside her in the snow, and she couldn't abandon him. Then Alpha King Thorne stepped into the clearing. He was massive, even in human form, easily 6.5 feet of solid muscle, with long dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and a face carved from granite and warfare. Scars marked his arms and neck, testament to battles survived. His eyes were black as midnight and twice as cold, fixed on Elara with an intensity that made her feel like prey caught in a predator's gaze. 5 elite guards materialized behind him, their hands on weapons, their stances ready to kill on command. Kieran scrambled to his feet. "Father, I can explain." "Silence." Thorne's voice was arctic, absolute. His eyes never left Elara. "You, stand up." Elara rose slowly, her legs shaking. From cold, from fear, from 3 years of near starvation that had left her weak. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, gaunt as a skeleton, her tattered furs hanging off her bony frame. Next to the Alpha King, she looked like something the winter had already killed and forgotten to bury. But she met his eyes. Some stubborn part of her refused to look away. "Who are you?" Thorne demanded. "Elara." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Elara of no pack. A rogue." "You've been teaching my son." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Forbidden knowledge. His gaze dropped to the ancient text lying open in the snow. Knowledge that was banned by pack law 3 generations ago. Knowledge that carries a death sentence for anyone who possesses it, let alone teaches it. Elara's throat went dry, but she forced herself to speak. "Knowledge that saved your son's life." The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thorne took a step forward, and Elara's survival instincts finally broke through. She stumbled backward, her bare feet slipping in the snow. One of the guards moved to flank her, cutting off escape. "Father, please!" Kieran tried again. "I said silence." Thorne's command made the boy flinch, but Kieran didn't back down. He moved to stand in front of Elara, his small body positioned protectively between her and the Alpha King. "She saved me," Kieran said, his voice shaking but determined. "I was going to be exiled. I was going to die. None of the trainers could help me. None of the pack teachers. Nobody. But she did. She taught me things they'd forgotten, things that actually worked." She taught you banned techniques that undermine pack hierarchy and threaten our way of life. Thorne's voice was like stone grinding against stone. Do you understand what that means? It means I can shift. Kieran's shout echoed through the forest. It means I'm not broken! It means I get to live! Before Thorne could respond, Kieran shifted. The transformation was flawless, fluid, controlled, powerful for a pup his age. The black wolf that stood in the snow was confident and strong, nothing like the terrified child who'd been crying in this forest weeks ago. He shifted back just as smoothly, standing naked in the cold, tears streaming down his face. She did that, Kieran said, his voice breaking. Not the trainers, not the elders. Her. A homeless Omega that everyone would call worthless taught me what no one else could. So if you're going to execute her for saving my life, you'll have to explain to the pack why their future Alpha King is alive because of forbidden knowledge. Thorne's jaw clenched. His eyes moved from his son to Elara, who stood frozen behind the boy, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. You. Thorne pointed at her. Explain. Now. Who are you? Where did you come from? How do you possess these texts? Elara's voice shook, but she answered, I was born to the Riverstone Pack. 3 years ago, their Alpha tried to force a mating bond with me, a brutal Alpha known for beating his Omegas. I refused. I ran. She wrapped her arms around herself. I took the ancient texts from our pack's forbidden archives because I knew they were burning them. I couldn't let that knowledge die. I've been surviving alone ever since. Every pack I approached rejected me, called me damaged, cursed, unworthy of protection. So you're a thief, Thorne stated flatly. I'm a keeper of knowledge that your ancestors valued above gold. Elara's voice gained strength, fueled by weeks of watching Kieran transform, of knowing her teachings worked. The ancient texts aren't dangerous because they're wrong. They're dangerous because they're right. Because they prove that strength isn't just dominance, that Omegas aren't just breeders and servants. That the old ways honored wisdom and balance, not just brute force and hierarchy. Several of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Elder Mara's warnings about these teachings echoed in the clearing. She's right, Father. Kieran's voice was quieter now, but no less certain. Everything she taught me, the breathing, the connection, the surrender instead of force, it all works. The trainers were teaching me to fight my wolf. She taught me to become my wolf. There's a difference. Thorne was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes moving between the terrified Omega, his transformed son, and the ancient text lying in the snow. His guards waited for his judgment, hands still on their weapons. Elara knew what was coming. She'd known since the moment she decided to teach Kieran. She'd saved the boy's life, but pack law was absolute somu. Teaching forbidden knowledge meant death. Possessing the ancient texts meant death. Being a rogue on pack territory without permission meant death. She'd die here, in this clearing, in the snow. But at least Kieran would live. Please, Kieran whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. Please don't kill her. Please, Father. Alpha King Thorne's next words would determine everything, not just Elara's fate, but the fate of knowledge that had been buried for generations, and perhaps the future of how the northern packs understood strength, wisdom, and worth. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the Alpha King's judgment. The silence stretched so long that Elara felt time itself might have frozen along with the winter air. Alpha King Thorne stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask of authority and calculation. His guards remained poised for the kill command. Kieran trembled between them, his small body the only barrier between Elara and execution. Then Thorne did something no one expected. He knelt in the snow. The movement brought him closer to eye level with his son, though he still towered over the boy. His voice, when he spoke, had lost some of its glacial edge. You believe she saved your life? I know she did, Kieran replied without hesitation. And you believe this knowledge, these forbidden teachings, they're not dangerous? They're only dangerous to wolves who want to keep others weak. The words came out with a child's blunt honesty, and several guards inhaled sharply at the implications. Thorne's gaze shifted to Elara. Show me. Elara blinked, confusion cutting through her terror. Show you what? The technique, the breathing. Whatever you taught my son. Thorne stood, his massive frame blocking out the moonlight. I want to see it for myself. This was insane. Elara's hands shook as she retrieved the ancient text from the snow, brushing ice crystals from its pages. She opened it to the section on breathing patterns, her voice barely above a whisper as she explained the 4-count rhythm, the mental visualization, the concept of surrender instead of force. The pack trainers teach dominance, she said, her words coming faster as desperate hope flickered in her chest. They teach young wolves to command their transformation, to force it through willpower. But the old ways understood that shifting is natural. It's the resistance that makes it difficult. When you stop fighting yourself, when you breathe and center and simply allow, the wolf emerges on its own. Thorne listened in absolute silence. When she finished, he turned to one of his guards. Marcus, you've struggled with partial shifts for 2 years. Come here. The guard stepped forward, his face uncertain. Marcus was a capable warrior, but everyone knew his transformations were incomplete. His shifts left him caught between forms, painful and ineffective. Try her method, Thorne commanded. What followed was remarkable. Elara guided Marcus through the breathing pattern, had him close his eyes and visualize his complete wolf form, taught him to stop forcing and start allowing. It took 20 minutes, but when Marcus finally shifted, it was the first complete transformation he'd achieved in 2 years. The wolf that stood in the clearing was whole, powerful, unmarred by the partial shift deformities that had plagued him. When Marcus shifted back, there were tears in his eyes. My gods, he whispered. I never thought— Again, Thorne ordered. Shift again. Marcus did, and this time it came even easier. Faster, smoother. The Alpha King's expression remained unreadable, but something had changed in his eyes. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her, not as a rogue to be executed, but as something else entirely. You understand what you've done, he said quietly. You've proven that our training methods are inferior, that we've lost something vital, that an Omega possesses knowledge our greatest warriors lack. Elara said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Thorne turned to face his guards, his son, and the forest itself, as if the entire pack were bearing witness to this moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Pack law demands death for teaching forbidden knowledge, but pack law also demands that the Alpha act in the pack's best interest. He paused, and Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Executing this Omega would mean destroying the knowledge that saved my heir and just healed one of my best warriors. It would mean choosing pride over pragmatism, tradition over truth. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Alpha King, the elders will hear my decision and accept it. Thorne's voice cut like a blade. He turned back to Elara. You will be granted sanctuary in the Shadowpine Pack. You will be given the title of Keeper of Ancient Knowledge, a position that hasn't existed in 5 generations. You will teach any wolf who struggles, who seeks the old ways, who needs what our current methods cannot provide. Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. You will be given a cottage, food, clothing, and protection. No wolf in this pack will harm you. You answer only to me. Thorne's dark eyes bored into hers. In exchange, you will share everything in those texts, every technique, every teaching, every piece of wisdom our ancestors knew that we've forgotten. Do you accept these terms? Elara's voice cracked. Yes, Alpha King. Then it's done. Thorne gestured to two of his guards. "Escort her to the guest cottage near the pack house. See that she's fed, clothed, and has everything she needs. Tomorrow we'll begin properly." The walk back to the pack compound felt like a dream. Elara moved through the snow in a daze, flanked by guards who hours ago would have executed her without hesitation. Kieran walked beside her, his small hand gripping hers tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. The cottage they brought her to was small but warm, warmer than anywhere she'd been in 3 years. There was a fireplace with wood already stacked, a bed with actual blankets, and within an hour, pack members arrived with food, clean clothes, and supplies. Elara stood in the center of the cottage, staring at the meal laid out before her. Hot soup, fresh bread, roasted meat, vegetables, more food than she'd seen in months. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon to her lips, and the first taste of hot broth made tears stream down her face. She wasn't going to die tonight. She wasn't going to freeze in the forest. She wasn't invisible anymore, and said News of the Alpha King's decision spread through the Shadowpine Pack like wildfire, met with shock, confusion, and in some quarters, outrage. But Thorne's word was law, and by morning, 3 more wolves had arrived at Elara's cottage, warriors who'd struggled with their shifts for years, seeking the knowledge that had transformed both Kieran and Marcus. Elara taught them all, and one by one, they succeeded. 3 months later, Elara stood in front of a polished mirror in her cottage and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her silver hair, once matted and filthy, now hung in clean waves past her shoulders. Her hollow cheeks had filled out, her cracked lips had healed, and her body, though still slender, no longer looked like a skeleton draped in skin. She wore simple but well-made clothing, warm furs lined with wool, and boots that actually fit her feet. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the light in her eyes, the spark of purpose that had replaced 3 years of desperate survival. The keeper of ancient knowledge. That's what they called her now. Some wolves still whispered about the homeless Omega who'd appeared from nowhere. Some of the elders still grumbled about forbidden teachings and dangerous precedents. But those voices grew quieter each day, drowned out by the undeniable results of Elara's work. She'd taught 43 wolves in 3 months, young pups struggling with their first shifts, adult warriors plagued by partial transformations, even a few older pack members who'd lost their connection to their wolves after trauma or injury. Her methods, the breathing patterns, the mental visualization, the spiritual centering from the ancient texts, worked with a consistency that traditional training could never match. The small cottage that had seemed so luxurious that first night had been expanded twice to accommodate her growing collection of students and texts. Alpha King Thorne had granted her access to the Pack's archives, where she'd discovered fragments of other ancient teachings, pieces of their heritage that had been buried and forgotten. She was slowly, painstakingly, reconstructing the wisdom their ancestors had valued above gold. Kieran visited her almost daily. The boy had become her shadow, absorbing not just the shifting techniques, but the history, the philosophy, the deeper understanding of what it meant to be a wolf. He excelled in all his training now, but more than that, he'd developed a compassion and wisdom unusual for someone his age. Other young wolves looked up to him, not because he was the Alpha King's son, but because he genuinely cared about helping those who struggled. "Teacher Elara," his voice called from outside her cottage one afternoon. "Father wants to see you in his study." Elara's heart did a small, complicated flip at the summons. Over the past 3 months, Alpha King Thorne had sought her counsel with increasing frequency. At first, it had been strictly about the ancient texts, about training methods and pack education. But gradually, their conversations had expanded to other topics: pack politics, leadership philosophy, the balance between tradition and progress. Thorne was not the cold, ruthless leader she'd expected. He was calculating, yes, and demanding, but he was also deeply intelligent and surprisingly willing to listen. When she challenged his ideas about Omega roles in the pack, he didn't dismiss her. He debated, questioned, and sometimes even changed his mind. When she suggested reforms to how the pack treated its weaker members, he implemented them. And sometimes, when the conversation lulled and the fire burned low in his study, she'd catch him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between respect and curiosity and something else, something that made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. She found him in his private study, a room lined with books and maps, a fire crackling in the hearth. He stood by the window, his imposing figure backlit by winter sunlight, and when he turned to face her, his expression was serious. "The full moon ceremony is tomorrow night," he said without preamble. "The entire pack will gather. I want you there, publicly, standing with the pack leadership." Elara's breath caught. "Alpha King, that's... The elders will accept what I decree." Thorne crossed the room until he stood directly before her. Up close, she could see the scars that marked his face, the silver threading through his dark hair, the weight of leadership that aged him beyond his years. "You've proven your worth 10 times over, Elara. It's time the pack formally acknowledged what you've done, what you continue to do. Some still see me as an outsider, a rogue who doesn't belong. Some need to learn that belonging isn't about blood or birth pack. It's about contribution, purpose, value." His dark eyes held hers. "You've given more to Shadowpine in 3 months than some wolves give in a lifetime. Tomorrow night, I want everyone to see that." The full moon ceremony arrived with crystalline clarity. A night so cold the stars seemed to burn brighter, the moon hanging full and silver above the gathered pack. Hundreds of wolves assembled in the ceremonial grounds, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, their eyes reflecting moonlight as they waited for their Alpha King to speak. Elara stood on the raised platform beside Thorne, her heart hammering. Kieran stood on her other side, his small hand gripping hers for support. Below them, she could see the faces of wolves she'd taught. Marcus, with his completed shifts, young Sarah, who'd been terrified of her first transformation, old Gareth, who'd reconnected with his wolf after a decade of loss. Thorne's voice rang out across the assembly, commanding and clear. 3 months ago, I made a decision that shocked many of you. I granted sanctuary to a rogue Omega. I gave her a title that hadn't existed in 5 generations. I broke with tradition, with protocol, with the way things had always been done. He paused, letting his words settle. Some of you questioned that decision, some still do. So tonight, I want to make something absolutely clear. He gestured to Elara, and she felt every eye in the pack turn toward her. This Omega has taught 43 wolves techniques that our traditional methods failed to provide. She has restored connections, healed traumas, and given struggling pack members their dignity and power. She has shared knowledge that our ancestors valued and that we, in our arrogance, decided to bury. Thorne's voice grew stronger. She has proven that true strength doesn't come from dominance alone. It comes from wisdom, from compassion, from the courage to challenge unjust rules and the humility to learn from those we've been taught to dismiss. The crowd was utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elara of Shadowpine, Thorne continued, using her pack name for the first time, has shown us that an Omega can possess knowledge that Alphas lack, that a homeless rogue can have more value than recognized pack members, that the old hierarchies we cling to aren't sacred, they're simply familiar, and familiarity is not the same as rightness. He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes, Elara saw something that made her heart stop. Respect, admiration, and underneath it all, the beginning of something deeper that neither of them had expected. "You are pack," Thorne said, his voice softer now but still carrying across the grounds. "Not because I granted you sanctuary, but because you've earned it through your actions. You are keeper of ancient knowledge, teacher, and valued member of Shadowpine, and anyone who challenges that will answer to me." The Alpha King raised his voice to address the entire assembly one final time. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. Greatness isn't found in maintaining the status quo. It's found in having the wisdom to recognize value wherever it appears, the courage to break rules that cause harm, and the strength to admit when we've been wrong. That is what true alpha leadership looks like. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcus stepped forward and bowed his head in respect. Sarah followed. Gareth, Kieran. One by one, and then in groups, wolves began showing their acknowledgement, some with bowed heads, some with spoken thanks, some with tears in their eyes. Elara stood there, overwhelmed, as the pack she'd once believed would kill her instead welcomed her home. The moon shone bright above them, illuminating the scene. A homeless Omega who'd become irreplaceable, standing beside an Alpha King who'd had the wisdom to see past tradition to truth. Later that night, as the ceremony concluded and wolves dispersed to their homes, Thorne walked Elara back to her cottage. They moved through the snow in comfortable silence, and when they reached her door, he paused. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving my son, for teaching my pack, for showing me that strength has more forms than I was raised to recognize." Elara looked up at him, this fierce warrior who'd granted her sanctuary when he could have ordered her death, who'd defended her against his own elders, who'd changed pack law because evidence demanded it. "Thank you," she replied, "for seeing me when I'd spent 3 years invisible." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection, the first thread of something that would take time to fully form, but was undeniably there. Thorne reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. "You were never invisible, Elara. The world was just blind." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the moonlight, finally warm, finally safe, finally home. And for the first time in 3 years, Elara looked up at the moon and whispered not a prayer for survival, but a prayer of gratitude. She'd been rejected, starved, frozen, and forgotten. But she'd also been found. And in being found, she'd discovered that her worth had never depended on pack acceptance or alpha approval. It had always been there, burning quiet and steady like a flame in winter, waiting for someone wise enough to see it. The story of the homeless Omega and the Alpha King was just beginning, but already it had changed everything, not through dominance or force, but through the simple, revolutionary act of recognizing value where tradition said there was none. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story and where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps us keep creating more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe, stay inspired.